What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, specifically the PC version just ahead of its official launch tomorrow. Now, obviously that is possible because Square Enix reached out and gave me early access to the PC version, which is how I'm bringing you this video. That said, it's quite a large game, so I have not been able to 100% it yet, but that full review is happening and will be coming hopefully not too far away, but again, big game, don't know how long that's going to take. Now, to jump into it from there, Rebirth is of course the second installment in the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. Though, just like the first game, this one is also making some substantial changes to the formula and specifically the plot, while turning it into a more open-world adventure, which has certainly been interesting to see because this game already has been making some changes to things both large and small from my own memories. But first, since we're covering the PC version, let's talk a little bit about how the PC port of this is looking. And straight away, it's already looking much better than the PC port of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I just got done playing a few days ago. So for starters, it's much better about letting you rebind the keys as you see fit, which means there aren't a lot of conflicts with things like using WASD in the menus as an example. So that, on top of a lack of other issues like the screen flickering I dealt with in the first one as well. So already, again, the PC port is looking much more playable here. Though as one small complaint, it does seem like they introduced some problems with the camera, which I think is down to the more free roam nature of this one. In terms of fighting against larger enemies that are hard to move around, I've had some issues with the camera sort of blocking my vision there. But what's more, occasionally the camera just randomly sort of snaps in a certain direction, which is kind of annoying, and even after adjusting a few settings to try to get it to stop doing that, I haven't been entirely successful, which may be something to watch out for. So while it's looking better on that front, it's probably also worth a mention that Rebirth here, coming out several years after the first part of the remake trilogy, has obviously iterated on a few things already from that initial game, which were very welcome additions to me. For starters, you have things like auto-cast and auto-unique ability materias that allow your companion party members to do more on their own rather than you having to manually do it, which is something, if you watch my recent review of that game, I noted as a bit annoying. So with those two things combined, it does seem like this game has, in fact, already addressed some of my biggest complaints about the original, but there's still a lot of game left before me and we'll see what happens. Moving on from there though, let's talk a little bit about what this game entails. Now, truth be told, between my own memory of this being a little hazy as I last fully beat this game when I was like 7, which was a good 25 years ago for me at this point, and the fact that I know they've made some changes, I'm not really sure what all we're going to be covering here story-wise, because the first game ends with you leaving Midgar as the first part of the original game. So this part would theoretically then, of course, be the large middle chunk, and while I remember that after you leave Midgar, you wind up going to a Chocobo Ranch, getting a Chocobo to pass through a sort of swampy area where a snake will chase you, Midgardstormer, and then you'd go into like a mine or something. And that's about where the specificity of my own memory fails me. Like, I know a lot of the individual parts, but I couldn't tell you like what order they come in, like the Golden Saucer, or Junon, or Wutai, or even returning to Nibelheim as an example. So this game will be especially interesting in that regard, especially since the game's opening chapter covers a good bit of things that I believe were disclosed much later in the original. The first chapter of the game is like a linear flashback showing some of the events that led to Sephiroth's disappearance and then re-emergence. And then, of course, there's a twist there that I don't want to spoil that, if you're aware of, should make that memory a little more informative than it actually is by itself. And then from there, at least the part that I've actually played up to this point, is basically the story as I just described it, with some notable changes. For an example, I mentioned that you, in the original version, would just bypass the snake, but here you're actually forced into a fight with it, which then ends in a cutscene that I would say has to do with the altered fates and sort of multiple timelines that I believe this game gets into. And basically all of that just to say that it's going to be a really weird trip through this game's story because I got to piece together what my own memory of this game is in like terms of the order of events versus the way they are presented here, which I think will be a fun time for me personally at least. But luckily along the way there's a whole host of new stuff to do, as it is a more traditional open world this time around, meaning that we've got large explorable areas, like 6 of them to be specific, alongside more structured structured dungeons for plot events, and that open world comes with a whole host of different activities. So right away they do introduce you to the chocobos, which functionally serve as mounts here, and I was curious how they were going to handle this, because one of the more prominent memories I have of the original is breeding different chocobos to get the different colors, which could navigate different terrain. In fact, I believe you needed a black one to get to a secret island that gave you the Knights of the Round materia. Here, though, I don't think they're doing that. Rather, each region has a specific type of chocobo you can catch and then ride in that region, which helps you navigate more locally rather than, going off to secret islands is my understanding. But while you do all of that, you'll be, of course, engaging with the game's progression systems, and we have the materia coming back, but as already mentioned, they've added new materia that make this system more interesting on the face of it and, more helpful stuff. So I think it'll be fun to build around that, at least when I'm not fighting the camera more than the boss. But not only do we get new materia this time around, we do, of course, wind up with more party members. They have Red 13 properly join your party immediately, which is great. Was always one of my favorites from this game. But they also changed a few of the other progression systems, rather the weapon upgrade system to be specific. So rather than spending skill points inside of your weapon on like little sub-materia that you could increase for passive benefits, here they actually do that outside of that particular system, where you have like these folios, it calls them, where you can spend your skill points this time on all these different abilities that you can then slot into the weapons similarly to materia. And I think that was a change they probably made because it makes upgrading a weapon actually feel like an upgrade. Plus they introduced a whole crafting system for things like consumables, quest items even, but also the actual gear and equipment you can upgrade on your characters as well. So I think it'll be fun to interact with that stuff and see how it plays out in total. But when it comes to actually exploring the world, as with many open worlds, there's a lot to get up to here. They brought back Chadley and his combat simulator stuff, so you can take on virtual challenges to earn summoning materia and just take on other fights there as well to earn all sorts of materia that he can then give you. And you unlock a lot of those challenges by engaging with the open world activities, such as hunting down challenging encounters and clearing the optional objectives, or searching out Rimna Wave towers, it calls them, which will give you some information about events in the immediate vicinity, or the life springs, which do much the same thing but also provide an abundance of materials. Now, a really interesting activity I thought you could do was that you can actually find shrines dedicated to the summon available in that area, and if you complete all 3 of the signs, you can fight a much weaker version of that boss if you are, say, having trouble getting a particular summon. And I thought that was a neat way to go about that. And then, of course, each area also has you doing things like capturing the chocobo in that region, so you can use it as a means of traversal, which means actually going and catching the chocobo. But then once you have that chocobo, you can go around repairing chocobo rest spots, which then act as your various fast travel points, which I thought was kind of neat. But then there are, of course, the mini games. So right away they introduce a really cool one called Queen's Blood, a sort of card game that is often associated with these, and I've actually really liked that so far. I've played probably a dozen matches of it, and you basically take various cards with different powers and stuff and try to take control of as much of the board as possible via each individual lane you are putting cards in, and I thought that was kind of fun. And then there were some chocobo races as well. Now, it's my understanding this game has a lot of minigame type stuff to get up to, so I'm curious to see how much more of that is. I imagine a lot of it comes up in the Golden Saucer, like I know there's chocobo races there as well, alongside a Coliseum, where I think is where you get the last limit break stuff. I remember there being a snowboarding minigame in one of them, so it'll be fun. But basically, the open world has a lot to do, a lot to see, a lot to knock out. There's even more, of course, proper side quests. I will say, early on here, seems like they did a better job with the side quests. They were honestly pretty boring in the first one, but here, it actually seems to explore some interesting lore topics, like what Mako poisoning does to ex-soldiers as an example, which Cloud should theoretically be suffering from. And side quests like that show off some of that stuff is exactly what I would be looking for in a game like this, so I hope that keeps up over the course of the rest of the game as an example. But then we have a few combat changes. The combat here is largely the same as the first one, with some minor changes of note, particularly around synergy abilities. So another thing you can get up to in the open world via these side quests and stuff is improving the relationship between you and individual party members. The original game did this through a sort of hidden mechanic, but it seems they're bringing that more to the forefront here, where your sort of approval or reputation with each individual party member can give you access to different synergies, which are moves that can be pulled off with the help of your other party members, in addition to everything else you were able to do. Otherwise, things like the pressure and stagger mechanics are still at play, outside of the little improvements that I already talked about. So it'll be interesting to see how that grows and evolves over the course of this one as well. But for right now, I think that pretty much covers it. First impressions wise, seems like it's going to go very well. I'm enjoying what I've played of this. The plot has been familiar yet slightly different. Obviously, the open world and things are much more visually impressive, and hopefully there will be interesting content that is fleshed out with. And given everything else that I've mentioned, I can definitely see why this game received so many rave reviews when it launched initially last year. So hopefully that continues to be a great experience, and I'm looking forward to diving into this one fully. And hopefully that's been a decently informative video for you here just before the game's PC release. And just before somebody asks, I have not had the chance to check this out on the Steam Deck yet, though I obviously will for the actual review. In the meantime though, that's going to do it for this video. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. By all means, let me know how you feel about this one down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.